Hello, welcome in. Another YouTube live tonight. I am John Kurtz. Appreciate you guys that are already hanging out here. Man, we got a lot of people already hanging out here ready for it tonight. We are going to talk about basically like a state of conference realignment address across the different leagues here. I've got more or less Pac-12 and ACC updates here, right? I mean, the Big Ten and the SEC, I think we all kind of know the deal there. The Big Ten would love to take Notre Dame. Notre Dame doesn't seem to be budging right now. The SEC would love to raid the ACC. Right now, there are a lot of questions about what's going on with that grant of rights. And we'll get to the bottom of some of those answers here today with a really good piece that was written about what is going on in the ACC. So I have that for you. Obviously, what you see teased in the title of the video is the Pac-12 is feeling very confident it will stick together. This is more John Canzano reporting. So again, it depends on how much stock you're putting into these reports. Canzano seems to be pretty good on the Pac-12 side, but also has been glowingly positive, I would say, about the Pac-12 the whole time. So, it behooves these leagues, once again, to feed reporters a more positive slant on everything, even if they don't really believe it or know what's going on. I think some of that is happening here, but I do think it's definitely worth exploring. So, really, it's been, what, 3-4 days since I last talked to you, and there has not been a ton of real hard news, tangible information that has happened. We have a lot of more speculative reports coming in from different sides. So that was my plan. I intend to take you through what we're hearing from Pac-12 reports, what we're hearing from the ACC, which I thought was probably the most illuminating and in terms of new information or just new reporting, seeing something out there for the first time. It's the most in-depth I've seen somebody go on the ACC. So to me, that's probably the most enlightening part of what we all have to go through tonight. Another thing, there was a little bit from a Dennis Dodd article. He wrote kind of a more or less what I'm trying to do here, like a State of the Union thing for the different pieces of conference realignment. It was either yesterday or the day before. And there was really only one nugget that I'm taking out of that. Really only one nugget that I'll share with you about that I found very interesting. If you guys want to talk any actual football, we did get the Big 12 preseason poll here within the last week, and the Oklahoma Sooners are not atop the Big 12 preseason poll for the first time in 7 years. They've been so 6 straight years. This time it is Baylor. And somebody gave Iowa State a first place vote. For the love of God, we need to get to the bottom of what happened there. I'm just joshing a little bit, Cyclone fans, but I mean, come on, losing that entire roster, someone's going to throw you a first place vote. I'm not sure what exactly is going on there. Plus, we've got Brett Yormark's press conference, his intro press conference coming up Wednesday at Big 12 Media Days. So I guess then the next time that I go live, we will have heard from Brett Yormark. That'll be very interesting. I actually got credentialed for Big 12 Media Days this week, but not going to be able to swing it. It was going to be a little bit too much. The problem is they do it on Wednesday and Thursday. So you have Big 12 Media Days coming up on Wednesday and Thursday. It was I can't, if you could sandwich it around a weekend, that would be much more doable. It's in Dallas. It's like an 8-hour drive for me. I can't, I couldn't do it for you, but I'll try and bring you as much information as I can. A couple guys from the podcast that I do are going to be down there. So hopefully I'll be able to still bring you a little bit of sound, video, perhaps extra access that you might not be able to get elsewhere. So, we'll see. We'll see what comes out of that. I'll be very interested, very, very interested to hear what Brett Yormark has to say, in particular at his intro press conference. So that's the outline for what I have for you tonight. Lately with realignment, most of these have been controlled by you guys. That's the case once again tonight. It certainly can be controlled by you guys as much as you want it to. The same parameters that I give you each and every live show, you can donate by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says say something. That is how you get your voice heard. Your question or comment will be entered into the chat at that point, cuts through all the rest of the noise, pins it up at the top for me. So that is your way to control the conversation tonight. If you have a topic you want me to touch on, if you want to tell me I suck, if you want to tell me I'm awesome, whatever it is, you can do so by donating. Click the $ below the chat box where it says say something in order to do that. Also, if you could right now, it would help me out if you just go like the video. Totally free. Doesn't cost you a cent. You can go like the video. I would really, really appreciate it. That is a free way to support the work that I'm doing here on this channel. And I forget to do this sometimes, but if you are watching this taped, you're not watching this live, you can donate and support the channel by going to my Venmo. It is John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo. So with that, it's off and running. I see a little San Diego State chatter in the chat there. I think we will get to that. I think I have one of the little bullet points in here about that. I did San Diego radio on Friday, I believe it was. And with my guy, John Schaefer, who does a great job hosting out there. And they were asking about San Diego State and realignment. And I said, man, I really haven't heard that much about San Diego State anywhere, but it would make sense. I would think it would be at the top of the Pac-12's list. And now for the first time, I did see San Diego State mentioned somewhere. I believe it was from John Wilner. So we'll get to that in just a moment. Now, the reason that I would imagine a lot of you are here, what you saw in the video, the title of the video is that the Pac-12 is very confident that it will stay together. And that comes from John Canzano's latest report. Again, Canzano is an Oregon columnist, radio host. He's a pretty popular figure up there in Pac-12 country, has over 60,000 Twitter followers for whatever that is worth. But this is not just random guy, I guess is the point that I'm trying to make. It's not totally random Twitter handle guy on the internet that is putting this out here. But he had a very short update over the weekend. And the part that was very interesting to me, Jay Rodriguez, thank you for the donation. I see that, Jay Rodriguez. Boom to the Sooner. I'll get to yours in just a moment. Was about the confidence of the Pac-12 sticking together. So it says confidence. The talk about the Big 12 poaching Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado is dramatically overstated. Now, that's pretty strong. That is a strong statement there. The Big 12 poaching the four corner schools is dramatically overstated. I don't blame the Big 12 for angling and dreaming about possibly adding a Pac-12 university. I don't blame conference universities for making a contingency plan. But I'm convinced that the Pac-12's remaining 10 members are galvanized right now. How confident are the ADs themselves that they'll stick together? I asked two. First one said, confident. The second said, feel very confident, and we have good options. So the Pac-12, again, is projecting a lot of confidence and projecting a lot of confidence there through John Canzano with what he says about them sticking together, not just very confident that they'll stick together. Honestly, that part is not as intriguing to me as the fact that he uses in his words that it's dramatically overstated that the Big 12 would poach those four schools, because there have been a lot of reports. I mean, The Athletic, CBS Sports, like legitimate outlets that have said there have been talks and position it as certainly much more than dramatically overstated that anything would happen. Push it as a legitimate, real possibility. So that seems to be like reporting really at odds. And that's either like really trying to do a PR job for the Pac-12, or a guy that is hearing from multiple sources in Pac-12 country that they are galvanized and sticking together. Now, a lot of things that could be happening there. That could just be a show. That could be a lot of people saying the right things because they feel like that's what they need to say right now, even if they are on the back burner, worried about what it is that they're doing. I've had more pushback, I think, that I've seen to the viability of the ACC Pac-12 partnership here in the last couple of days. Like it really does seem like that is not being as widely accepted as Canzano really framed it at first, and some others framed it at first, that there are just a lot of questions. How will this work logistically? How do you make it work for the ACC? You would have to be giving them most of the money probably for them to even be interested in this at all. And then how does that actually help the Pac-12? So I still think that there's a long ways to go before that would ever get to the finish line of being something meaningful. But that doesn't mean that the Pac-12 couldn't still stick together and decide to either remain at 10 or go try to add somebody else. Another thing I think this reinforces is, once again, Arizona seems to be the school that is the most gung-ho about coming to the Big 12. And that is not just from observations of their fans and media, but what their media has been saying. I mean, it's been that Arizona 24/7 site that was the first to report that there were meetings between the four corner schools and the Big 12. And they continue to push this message that Arizona is the most likely of the group to actually go ahead and make the jump, whereas everybody else may be a little bit more hesitant, particularly Utah seems to be on the opposite end of that spectrum, with Colorado and Arizona State probably somewhere in between. So I do believe that. And what that means is maybe it is that you go get Arizona. I even had somebody suggest to me today with another interview I was doing with a podcast. Somebody suggested, well, what about if Arizona is like that convinced, Arizona really wants to do it right now, what about you grab Arizona and San Diego State, put the pressure on the rest of the Pac-12 schools there by at least pulling off one? And I thought, well, that's very interesting. I'm definitely all for take whatever you can get and start putting the pressure on everybody else to make decisions. bringing San Diego State into the mix, that's an interesting one. I have really I love San Diego State if it's if the expansion were not including any other Power 5 schools. I like them a lot more than Memphis. I like them more than Boise. I mean, you're talking about a market with no NFL team, obviously, right now. You're talking about getting into SoCal. The same time SoCal is leaving for the Big Ten. I think there's a lot of good there. And clearly they've been a productive football program recently. But I don't know. I mean, some people would tell you that it was that the Big 12 perhaps moved too early to go add the 4 schools that they did, because now it would be easier to pull the Pac-12 schools. Maybe the Pac-12 schools would be more willing to come into a conference that didn't have the 4 American schools. That was one narrative that I saw, that the Pac-12 is really angling and trying to keep these teams by saying, like, why are you going to go play in a league with a bunch of teams from the American? And telling TV partners, why are you going to go get in bed with a conference that is utilizing a lot of teams from the American Athletic Conference? Like, you're better than that, or you should be better than that. So I think that's a lot of the warfare that's going on behind the scenes. And that was the first time I'd even heard that idea of, like, if Arizona is the only one you can jiggle loose right now, why not take them, package them up with somebody else, and put the pressure on the rest of the schools? It's just, it's hard. And this is nothing against San Diego State. I don't mean it to be disparaging against them, but it is hard for me to totally get behind the idea of pulling anybody in that's not Power 5 right now, based on what the landscape is, because so many things can happen. We're also talking the ACC being on really shaky footing. And again, we'll get to that later on. We're also talking about the ACC being on pretty shaky footing. And if that grant of rights, if somebody determines they can actually fight that, or that they would be willing to pay upwards of $300 million to get out of the league, then all of a sudden you have way more options on the table. I mean, you want to go get like Georgia Tech, you want to go get Louisville, you want to go get like a Pitt. I mean, there would be a lot more in terms of options on the table for the Big 12 at that point. So it's hard for me in that world where that possibility could exist and doesn't seem that far away to commit yourself to San Diego State, even if it means being able to pry Arizona away. So it's an interesting scenario. And if the Pac-12 really is that confident, and they're projecting that much confidence, I do see the value in, like, hey, if we can just get Arizona, whatever means necessary, get Arizona here and make everybody else start freaking out. Like, oh, you guys think you're really confident that you're sticking together, huh? Well, let's see what happens here. The other part of taking San Diego State would be, you're not only removing Arizona, but then you're taking away the number one option for the Pac-12 to expand, because I would think that's a no-brainer. And I keep seeing San Diego State and SMU mentioned by John Wilner as the primary expansion candidates if the Pac-12 were going to go that route. So you'd be taking away one of their expansion candidates as well. That would be a part of the calculus there. So that's the case. Whether or not you agree with it, that's up to you. But that would be the case for doing that. Anyway, the Pac-12 feels very confident, and John Canzano says, let me read that one more time for effect here, that talk about the Big 12 poaching those 4 schools is dramatically overstated. Dramatically overstated. That feels a little too dramatic for me, and I think anything with that kind of language behind it right now in a conference realignment world is perhaps a bit foolish. But again, I do trust that he has a lot of legitimate sources inside the Pac-12. It's just a matter of who's telling who what and for what reasons, and who actually really knows what's going on, as we discussed ad nauseum here throughout the last couple of weeks. Jay Rodriguez, I think I already shouted you out. Thanks for your work. Go Cougs. Thank you, Jay. Boom to the Sooner. Boom to the Sooner. Have the Big 12 teams signed a contract with each other? If yes, why are any of them rumored to leave for other conferences? Well, so the grant of rights is the same deal that Oklahoma and Texas are dealing with, right? So it's through the end of 2025. You'd have a couple years on that to get out of if you wanted to do so. So yes, there would theoretically be a financial penalty there, but there's also the fact that if enough schools left that the conference dissolved, then that goes out the window. So if it were a group of, like, let's say 4 schools, 6 schools, whatever it might be, that would leave and basically just torpedo the whole conference, and then it's all going to dissolve and break up, then you don't have to worry about that. I mean, that was some of the logic behind why Bob Bowlesby was thinking ESPN was trying to split up the league last year, because that would save a lot of people a lot of money and get them out of their TV contract, right? It would, like, void the TV contract there. So that's all. These are all about grant of rights and how long your TV rights are under control, because theoretically what that means at its core is that if you leave, your TV revenue from another conference would still go back to the Big 12, back to that entity, if you left before that is up. So that's the situation that everybody is in. Steven, I've just lost you. Steven, appreciate the donation. Steven says, what is your prediction on who will ultimately end up in the Big 12? Man, it's such a tough question to answer. I don't know how confident I honestly feel in the four corner schools right now. It feels to me like Arizona is going to wind up here somehow, and it feels to me like Colorado is going to wind up in the Big 12 somehow. I am less certain on Arizona State, and I am less certain on Utah. So I'm almost inclined to like kind of just take the in between option there, even though I don't. I think it's probably more likely that nobody comes or all four of the four corner schools come. But because I'm so 50-50, I'll just give you the middle answer and say, like, I don't know. I guess like Arizona and Colorado come and the Pac 12 goes and reloads with like San Diego State and somebody else. But that is purely a guess. And I'm the one to tell you, fully admitting, like, I have kept up on this as much as I can. I read everything that's out there. I don't think it's fair to even like prognosticate like a definitive guess right now on what it is that's going to happen. I think there is so much that is still possible here. So I don't mean to cop out on you there, Stephen. And I really appreciate the support and I appreciate the donation. But I think it's a fool's errand. It's kind of an exercise in futility to try and be doing that right now and give like a definitive guess. Julius, man. Thank you, Julius. Really appreciate the support. Julius, howdy, John. I just wanted to support your work. Go Cougs. You're the man, Julius, as always. Thank you so much for that. BYU Cougar fan there. That's Cougs as in Cougs for Julius, a BYU fan. Julius, we need to talk about these Utah fans, man. I tell you what, learning about Utah on Twitter over the last couple of weeks has been quite interesting. And actually, interestingly enough, maybe Utah is justified in that because John Wilner, the guy who initially reported USC and UCLA to the Big Ten, who is the Pac-12 guru, he did a ranking index, basically like a confidence index, how confident each school should be in the fact that they'll like find a nice home, like have a good landing spot when this is all said and done. And Utah actually was like, he had Utah as high on the list as anybody right now, basically being like, they'll be fine. Whether it's the Big 12, whether it's the Pac-12, they'll be fine. They'll be competitive. They don't have anything to worry about. I was like, okay, I guess people really do think very highly of Utah. And I have respect for Utah's program. I just don't, the brand power seems to be inferior to what's already in the state in BYU. They're not that far removed from being a non-Power 5 school. And how much of their success is directly tied to just one coach here in Kyle Whittingham? These are all questions that I would really pose to Utah fans. But hey, they're passionate. Clearly, I've gained respect for their passion as a fan base, if nothing else, right? How about that for a nice spin on it? That's a nice spin. Eric, thank you for the donation. I see your message was retracted. If you have something, Eric, I'm sorry if I'm missing it, but thank you for the donation. Thank you for the support. Try and get my attention back in the chat if I am missing what your question or comment was. Scrolling down here, we got another from all right, Christian. So Christian, somehow I missed that. Christian, how reliable do you think MHVER3 is on Twitter? He's posted so many things. Are we being taken for a ride? Go Cougs. Thank you for the support, Christian. It's a great question. I know I was talking about him the other day, and I think against probably my better judgment, I have mentioned a tweet or two of his. It's worth a follow at least. I'll say that. It's worth a follow. MHVER3 on Twitter has tweeted a lot of things, most of it related to the Big 12 and the Pac-12 in that situation, but just realignment stuff in general. There is a pinned tweet from MHVER3 from back in April where he did predict UCLA and USC to the Pac-12, which is noteworthy because it was only those two. And I don't think anybody had really prognosticated that it would be just those two and those two alone that would be going to the Big Ten when they did. The USC part was pretty easy to predict. I think most people would have had Oregon or Washington going with them. So I don't know. That part at least bodes well. I described it like this to somebody who asked me the other day on Twitter about how reliable that guy is. All I know is he's built up a following in the last year, and maybe it goes even before that. But I started picking up on it within the last year after the last round of realignment and all that. And to me, it feels somewhere in between, like on one end, you would have Pete Thamel, Dan Wetzel, Brett McMurphy, the most respected reporters in college football. And on the other end, you would have random guy with a blog. He's somewhere in between. How far in between, what side it's more leaning to, I think is just up for your own interpretation. There's certainly things that all sound like they could be plausible. They are certainly things that in some ways have been backed up after the fact by other reporting, like Dennis Dodd, for instance. And I think that that Twitter account has kind of touted that, like, hey, here's an article that's basically saying what I've been saying. So it feels like there is at least some level of legitimacy to it, but once again, it is just impossible to really know. So I would just say take it with a grain of salt. It's all very entertaining. Um, I just like taking in as much of the information as I possibly can from anything that I deem to be at least somewhat legitimate, at least somewhat legitimate. Um, and that to me falls under that umbrella. So there's at least a shred of credibility there to me for this person, and maybe a lot more than what I'm actually giving credit for here. But I feel like it is my duty to tell you, like, I can't sit here and say, like, hey, this guy knows exactly what's going on and you should follow every single word of his. I take it all with a grain of salt, but I do follow it. So that would be my suggestion. Thank you for the donation, Christian. Much appreciated. Boom to the Sooner. Boom to the Sooner says, with all the preseason, all Big 12 Wildcats, are you surprised they weren't picked higher as a team? Yeah, we'll hopefully talk a little bit later on, depending on if we get time, about that actual Big 12 preseason poll. But yeah, K-State had 6 preseason all Big 12 selections, most of anybody, and yet they were picked 5th in the league. I mean, it doesn't surprise me. Look, we go through this all the time. K-State's 2012 Big 12 championship team that was number 1 in the BCS in November was picked 5th, I believe, it was 5th or 6th in the Big 12 preseason poll. So, yeah, and that was coming off of a double-digit win season when they went to the Cotton Bowl. So, look, there's never any respect for my Cats. All right, I get it. Some of it too could be, I mean, really, if you want to talk about the book on this team, it's that they appear to have a really good front line, a really good starting 22, and some more questions when it comes to depth. So maybe that's what it is. Hey, we know you guys have a lot of high-end talent, but do you have the depth to hold up throughout an entire season to really legitimately compete for a Big 12 title? Like, I mean, okay. But I think, if you were asking me, I didn't actually vote. I do this every year. I get the poll mailed to me, and I just am too lazy to fill it out. And plus, the preseason All Big 12 team, I always feel guilty because doing offensive linemen, I just feel like there's no way none of us media jabronis actually know what the hell we're talking about with the offensive line. It's just all like word of mouth, like who people tell us is good on the offensive line we'll vote for. So I didn't actually vote. If you really made me vote, I'd probably put K-State like 3rd. I think they're going to be like a 9-3 type of team. So maybe moderately disappointed, not surprised. I would say boom to the Sooner. But plus, K-State kind of operates better in the shadows, operates better with a chip on its shoulder in the shadows. So it's not the worst thing in the world. Zach, which ACC schools do you think the Big 12 has targets on for that round of realignment? Well, the schools that it would not be are the schools that are all positioning themselves to go to the Big 10 of the SEC. So, like, it seems like Virginia, North Carolina would be potential fits with the Big 10, being that they are a little more academically inclined. There's also not a current presence for the Big 10 in either state. Same for the SEC, by the way, which is another reason why they would probably covet them as well. But they're AAU schools. The academics would really fit in well with the Big 10. And then for the SEC, we're obviously talking about Clemson, Florida State, Miami, really being that group. So you'd have to remove that. I think Louisville would be at the top of my list because Louisville was considered by the Big 12 back when West Virginia and TCU were both added at that time when we did realignment back in like 2010, 2011. So I think that would be very high on the list for the Big 12 if the ACC were to get poached and kind of blow up. I've seen Georgia Tech thrown out. I've seen Duke. I don't know how Duke would choose to operate. That would be kind of fascinating in that scenario. So I don't know how realistic that would actually be. I don't know if West Virginia is still around in the conference and you could get Pitt for them to bring back that rivalry. I think that would be really fun. And these all feel like schools, by the way, that are very similar to the four corner schools in the Pac-12, where you're not going to be getting any richer by adding them per school, but you might be able to still come out even by adding them per school because they're kind of just in line with what you have already. So that's my thought there on the ACC. And that is a part of why it is more difficult for me to get behind the idea of, like, if you can get Arizona and pull off San Diego State, like, I don't know. I'd almost rather just wait on the ACC and see what happens there because it's inevitable. I mean, the ACC is not long for this world. And I've got, I'll just give you the quote right now. Skip ahead a little bit from the ACC update, which was from David Teal of the Richmond Times-Dispatch. And I've had a lot of people tell me he's as plugged in as basically anybody in the ACC. He quoted Jack Swarbrick, who is the Notre Dame athletic director, who was at the ACC meetings, because obviously the Fighting Irish, all their non-football sports compete in the ACC. And as he's leaving, like ACC meetings, he says, we're getting a 2 solar system model here. You have 2 suns with all the gravitational pull, the Big Ten and the SEC. People are going to have to figure out how to align with one or the other. Okay, that is a guy leaving ACC Media Days saying there are 2 conferences that matter. Ours isn't one of them, and everybody's going to have to figure out how to fall in line with the other 2. So it seems inevitable that this is going to happen to the ACC at some point. There will not be a saving of the ACC eventually, even from people who are in the meetings there. Now, Jack Swarbrick, I think a lot of that is he's salty at Jim Phillips for blowing up the playoff, which there was more in the article about that, which, your boy was happy to see that, because I've been telling you guys that this whole time, that was such a dumb move by Jim Phillips. I digress. That's a tangent for another day, but it feels like the ACC probably is going to blow up. So I think the Big 12 would be, in a lot of ways, wise to wait around for that. Robert, thank you for the donation. Robert says the Pac-12's argument that going to the Big 12 is beneath them because it took AAC schools is suspicious if they're looking to take Mountain West schools. Yeah, well, again, it's like desperate times, desperate measures, and people are going to say, I think the idea for the Pac-12 there would be like, you just angle that as hard as you can. You're not wrong to point out some hypocrisy there, assuming that is actually happening, that they're debating Mountain West schools in a way. But I think the idea there would be like, they're going to try and keep this group of 10 together. They're going to try and do everything they can to fend off the Big 12. And what that means is, in the meantime, talking down the Big 12 and saying like, hey, that's a conference that stooped down to get AAC schools when we're the mighty Pac-12, that's the Conference of Champions. It's been around for over 100 years. Like, you need to link up with us and not that conference. And then if it goes to hell and you lose that and you have to, or you lose a couple and you have to go the Mountain West route to add a few schools, then you just do it. I mean, I really think you can't really worry too much about shame in this whole process. I think that's out the window at this point in time. You can't really worry about shame or consistency or hypocrisy, because there's just inevitably going to be some of that with everybody, and you have to always be acting in your best interest at all times. So not totally fair of you to point out, but I think that would be the response I would have to it, and what the general attitude of the Pac-12 has to be right now. Trevor, appreciate the donation, my friend. Trevor says, as a UC student, I'm super frustrated at what's been going on. UC gets its big break in the Power 5, and now it's going to be all for nothing. Justice for Cincinnati. Well, Trevor, I understand the frustration undoubtedly, because it felt like we were going to get a couple years of stability here. We had been talking about on these YouTube lives, like, hey, man, it really looks like the Cincinnati, BYU, Houston, UCF, like those schools are going to get a crack at Texas and Oklahoma here. The way this is all breaking, it seemed great. You're coming off the playoff appearance. You kept Fickle. So much is going right. And I can level with you on the fact that K-State is in the midst of its best recruiting class probably in my lifetime right now. And they seem to have really turned a corner. And they have a team right now that legitimately has the horses, I think, to compete for a Big 12 championship. And yet now we're like petrified about the future again and where this is all going. So I feel you, man. I feel you. I would just say, don't think that this is totally over right now. I still think the Big 12 at worst is in like a 50-50 position, jockeying with the Pac-12 right now. And we just don't really know what's going to wind up happening. So there's a new commission town. I think it's a very good hire. I think it was a very savvy hire by the league. They still have Bowlesby around on like a consultant basis, and technically for another month still on the job. So let's not freak out too much. I think it's still going to be okay, at least until it's not. But I understand the frustration. I definitely do. Would not fault you for that for a second. Zonell. What's up, Zonell? Zornell. I believe Zornell. Sorry, it's tough for me to read. God, that makes me feel old, like having to lean in and read. That is my fault. Zornell, do you believe with 2 super conferences, some fans will get turned off? Yeah, I know for sure. Some fans are going to get turned off. I think the thing that will be most interesting to monitor to that is like, does it eventually produce diminishing returns on the TV ratings? Like, it's great right now to look at like an Auburn Penn State non-con game and be like, man, look at the rating that drew. But if Auburn and Penn State are both middling like 6-6 programs in these new super conferences, because now every game is against somebody really good, does that get the same draw? Perhaps not. And do you start to see diminishing returns on that and less money coming in long term? I think there is a scenario where this was a play for short-term gain and lining your pockets with cash in the short term, but long term could be your death knell. Signing up for your death. Now, Joel Klatt, came out the other day and basically said the total opposite, that it'll be great. And once it is kind of like that NFL model, it's going to really scratch the itch of a lot of NFL fans even more, and they'll be more interested and more casual fans coming into the game. So maybe the answer is some college fans fall off and then they gain some more, and it doesn't really ultimately matter for the overall money and popularity of the sport. I would tend to lean more to the other side. I think you would definitely see some diminishing interest at that point in time, but it is hard to say for sure. It is hard to say for sure. Where are we at here? Michael says, just checking in, can't stay. Want to drop dollars in hopes you roast Utah fans for thinking they are the shizzle and better than the Big 12. Hashtag leave them out. Hashtag go Cougs. Hashtag BYU. That is well done, Michael. Everybody take notes. That's how you do it. That's how you roast your rival here to get me to read it on the channel. And Michael, I hope you caught a little bit earlier. I did drop in a little mention of the Utah fans again. That's happened a couple times here on some of these live shows lately. Believe me, I've taken notice. I've taken notice of Utah fans' attitude. And look, I will just say, again, respect their program. To me, looking through what they've been the past 10 to 15 years, they remind me of Oklahoma State, which is a program with remarkable consistency and has had some very nice highs and is certainly worthy of praise. Kyle Whittingham, I think, is an excellent coach. But what is Utah without Kyle Whittingham? And Utah is not the best brand in the state. I think that's definitely BYU. So to act like the Big Ten is going to come calling when we're talking about you need to add $100 million per year in value to make it work with the TV contract. Utah thinking they can do that when Oregon and Washington can't even come close to doing that is ridiculous. And thinking that Utah would come in and just run the Big 12, I also think is ridiculous. They would be a team in contention at the top of the conference, but it would be a whole conference of a lot of teams that are pretty similar to Utah. So yes, I feel you, Michael. I don't have quite the fiery passion that I know that you guys that are BYU fans do towards that and towards taking them down for the attitude right now. So I hope that will suffice. But that's just me as a neutral observer. I picked that up, not somebody that has to sit there and live it every single day. So it feels to me a little bit like a fan base that just is tired of like having dealt with BYU over the years and BYU being the bigger, better brand in the state. Say what? I appreciate the donation. Say what? Could Kansas do a Notre Dame deal with the SEC? I see what you're saying. So like move everything but football there. I mean, I don't know what the deal would be there, like keeping football in the Big 12, or do you go independent with football? I guess the short answer is no, I don't. That feels too complicated for me. I don't know how all of that would work. And frankly, if you're Kansas, I mean, like basketball is the part that you would want in the Big 12. Because it's going to be a tremendous basketball conference. And hey, like if Arizona gets added, I mean, the basketball is just going to be even more brutal and crazy than it already is. So I doubt it. I doubt that you would see anything like that. Showy's won. Thank you for the donation. Showy's won. Appreciate that. Let's see. Sorry, if something's happening there. I hope nothing's happening with your donations. I saw someone talking there about something getting deleted, and I saw that someone's comment did get deleted. So my apologies if something happened there. A little bit more on the Pac-12. This is from John Willer, again, the guy that broke the initial story here of USC and UCLA leaving. This is the expansion point here. He says, if the league replaces the Los Angeles schools, two options stand above others for strategic value. San Diego State because of the proximity to Southern California, and SMU because of the foothold in Dallas. Makes sense. Go back to that story from Mac Engel in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram last year, where he was talking about TCU and Houston being in play and on the table for the Pac-12 in an expansion scenario because they would bring the state of Texas. It is clear, seemingly, that the Pac-12 has some legitimate interest in the state of Texas, which I mean, you can understand. That's a pretty valuable place to be in football. How about this as a scenario, though? Another thing that I found interesting from Wilner, he said, in the interest of sketching as many scenarios as possible so readers aren't surprised by any outcome, we should add this to the mix, a fractured separation. In this scenario, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah would head to the Big 12, largely because of their geographic fit. Washington, Oregon, Stanford, and Cal would join the ACC because of their institutional alignment. He adds, it's unlikely, sure, but don't discount the potential for this wave of realignment to conclude somewhere outside the box. I don't know. I mean, that seems, at least on some level, to make sense. That seems on some level to make sense. Um, Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, Utah to the Big 12. And then the other splintering, because if that happened, I would guess in that scenario, that would happen first. That the Big 12 would be able to pull away those 4 schools. And then the Pac 12 is in total flux and everybody will be looking for lifeboats. And in that scenario, then I'm sure the ACC would be looking at it like, okay, we desperately need to reopen up this TV deal, adds value to it. And Washington and Oregon would definitely do that, perhaps Stanford. But certainly Washington and Oregon would do that. The problem there becomes then the legalities. You already have everybody in the ACC scrambling around right now looking for loopholes in that grant of rights. How can we get out of this? That would just turn that's going to crank that volume up to like 11 or 12. And I don't know exactly how that would work, but that could put the ACC in a lot of trouble with losing those schools then to the SEC. And dominoes could just continue to keep falling. So I think that is why, to me, it would feel still pretty unlikely. But from like a cultural standpoint, it makes a ton of sense. From an ACC needing extra money to its TV contract standpoint, that would make a ton of sense. For the Big 12, like wanting to crush a conference and get rid of one of the primary competition foes right now, that makes a ton of sense. So I do see how you get there. Excuse me, that could be a possibility. And I also saw this that I found very interesting on Cal. The fear index. That's how this was framed from Wilner. He's talking about the fear index for all of these schools. That was where it was the fear index on Utah was very low. But the fear index on Cal, he had listed as high. And it says on Cal, eons of university apathy toward football have thrust Cal into an uncomfortable position with no guarantee the Bears will find a home if the Pac-12 fractures. As difficult as it might be to envision Cal sharing a conference with Iowa State or Baylor, remember this. The athletic department has 28 Olympic sports to support and hundreds of $million in stadium debt to service. The Bears cannot afford to be selective. So I have thought this whole time, anytime Stanford or Cal was mentioned with the Big 12, I just thought, look, those guys, I think they would drop football before they would stoop to joining the Big 12 and what they deem to be people not on their level academically, culturally, all these things. But if there are legitimate money problems, I mean, money talks. And if Cal has no other way to get the money, maybe that is something that forces them into doing that. Wilner seems to be really open to all the possibilities. It seems like we're getting a more realistic viewpoint from John Wilner in his Pac-12 reporting, whereas John Canzano is much more painting only the scenarios that really would work out glowingly for the Pac-12 and the schools remaining. Whereas Wilner is much more like, hey, there's a lot of stuff that could be on the table here. And I think Wilner is much more in the land of where this is right now. It still feels very up in the air and like there is so much that could happen. So that's another part of why I bring that stuff to the table for you. But if I'm seeing Wilner say that there would even be a little chance that Cal could join the Big 12, then I guess I should be more open to it. That did open my eyes on that front. So, hey, get ready for some trips to Berkeley, I suppose there. James, all right, let's get to some donations here. If you want to donate, click the $ below the chat box where it says say something. That is how you make sure that your question or comment gets to my attention and cuts through all the noise in the chat tonight. Also, please like the video if you haven't yet. That's free, easy way to support the channel. I would appreciate it. James says, NFL fans won't come over to watch a junior league. College fans outside these two will fall off. I watch Big 10, SEC, ACC, Big 12, AAC, and Pac-12 games, but will watch zero if disenfranchised. Well, I appreciate the conviction there for sure, James. I don't blame you at all. Speaking for myself, I know that at least for a while, I would still watch quite a bit of it. I mean, I'm hooked. Like the game has me hooked. College football has me hooked. Its hooks are in too deep. I would not be able to just totally shut it off and not watch. But maybe over time I would get there because my evolution as a person already has been transforming from like one-dimensional sports guy, which I was, for most of my life until probably like 7 or 8 years ago, and then starting to develop more outside interests and focusing more in on just my love of college football than anything else. But the point is, like, I've been able to change as a fan, and some of that has been you can get way more information on what it is that you really truly love instead of just having to watch SportsCenter and take whatever you could get 10 years ago. Like now I can find all this specific information on college football. It's the reason you guys are here on this channel right now. You can get specific targeted information to what it is that you really want and love. So for me, that tells me I can evolve, I can change, and that I probably would start to change over time, even if I wouldn't right at first. But I respect you if you have the guts to just say like, hey man, if this happens, I'm just going to be done. I'll be done and I'll be out. much respect, man. Much respect, because greed has taken over this game, and greed has definitely changed it all from what we really know and love. I'm just still in like survival mode right now, where I want to live on borrowed time as long as I can, latch onto this as long as I can, with the conference that I love, with the school and schools that I love to watch compete, and just go from there and let it play out as it will. Control what you can control, that sort of thing. That's kind of my attitude right now. But I definitely appreciate the thought, and I definitely appreciate the gumption that you have in that, if and when this does go down. Andrew says, love your show, John. Do you think the SEC will poach Oklahoma State and Baylor to put the nail in the coffin for the Big 12? It would crush our media dollars. Andrew, thank you for the donation. And look, Baylor is one that I don't see Baylor mentioned a whole heck of a lot. And Baylor has arguably the best athletic department in the country going right now. National championship a couple of years ago in basketball, still a dominant basketball program. Football, 12 wins last year, and winning the Sugar Bowl, preseason pick to win the Big 12 this year. Baylor should get more respect than it does, especially a program that's been to or won a Big 12 championship under 3 different coaches in the last decade. Oklahoma State, I think, has always been like at the top of the list or toward the top of the list for the Big 12 because of the consistency of that football program, and they do have a solid brand with the program as long as Gundy has been there doing his thing. Again, this is all about dollars, right? So here's the problem with all these scenarios, and why I think it's a good thing for the Big 12 that nobody's really being sought after to be poached. Like, maybe if we get to like the final stages of this and everybody's determining like, all right, who are going to be the final couple of teams that get a lifeboat to the big show. And that would probably happen like after some teams have been cut, whenever we would get to that stage theoretically in all of this. I think that's when you might see like an Oklahoma State or Baylor pop in. Right now, I mean, the SEC and the Big Ten are both basically at like, we're talking, you're going to have to bring in $100 million per year in value to make it worth the league taking you on. Frankly, what does the SEC care if the Big 12 exists or not right now? It doesn't matter to them. It's not like the Big 12 where there's an advantage to killing the Pac-12. For the SEC, it doesn't matter either way. The Big 12 is not interrupting a single thing that the SEC is doing. It's not messing up their championship hopes. It's not messing up their money. None of that. If you took on Baylor or Oklahoma State right now, you'd be losing. The schools would all be losing money because they would not make up enough to deal with the fact that you'd have to cut the pie an extra couple of slices to give them whatever their revenue share would be. So that's the problem with it. And that's why I think that they're still going to be safe as far as the Big 12 goes right now. It's all economics. And like, we're just learning that the more and more this goes. Like, I think most people generally realize that from the get-go, but it's become increasingly more clear as we advance through this. It is just all about money. And Oregon and Washington are the prime examples there. Like, are Baylor and Oklahoma State better brands, better programs than Oregon and Washington? They look, no offense, again, and I just said Baylor has arguably the best athletic department in the country right now, but they don't have long-term brand value like Oregon and Washington do. And Oregon and Washington are stuck in no man's land in tweener zone, not getting an invite to either. I mean, if the SEC, that's another part of this. If the SEC really wanted to go out and add right now for the sake of adding, even if it's not going to make them any money, wouldn't they go get Oregon and Washington? I mean, Oregon and Washington are desperate for a spot in one of those two conferences. They could have them right now if they wanted to, because the Big Ten is saying no. So I say all that just to explain, I think, the situation to you. And hopefully, Andrew, I hope that makes you feel better about it, because I would assume that you're a Big 12 fan. So I appreciate the kind words about the show. I definitely appreciate the donation, and I hope that gave a pretty thorough answer to your question. Again, down the line, very much so, Baylor and Oklahoma State could wind up there. But I think that would come closer to the final iteration, the final stages of what's going on, where right now we're more like in the middle formation of what we're ultimately going to have in college football. Say what? What's up, Say What? Say What says, Jim Mora said UConn is trying to get to the ACC. What about Villanova and Georgetown to the ACC? Jim Mora says UConn is trying to get to the ACC. I mean, UConn can try. I don't know what on earth the ACC would be doing in bringing them in. Again, there are questions about if you were to add somebody, that may give everybody the out to exit, because that may void the grant of rights. It may change the TV deal, and then everybody could just leave, and you'd have teams pouring out to the SEC. And for what? Because you wanted to take a chance on adding UConn. UConn football is dreadful, like absolutely atrocious right now. no, we've seen basketball doesn't matter. If the ACC were going to do something like that, wouldn't they add Kansas before UConn, because that's a better basketball program than what UConn has? So I just, I don't know what Jim Moore is on with that, but and maybe if he is just saying like, hey, they're trying. Okay, I mean, great. I'm like, shoot your shot, but I could go call up Megan Fox right now. Well, I couldn't. I could go like send Megan Fox a DM on Instagram or something and ask her out and hope that happens. But I think UConn and I would end up in the same place as far as that goes. So Villanova and Georgetown to the ACC. I mean, I don't know. Maybe if there's some way they work out like just basketball, maybe there's a way for that to go down. And if it's going to be UConn basketball only, maybe the dynamics of that work. And I guess if that's what Jim Moore was really getting at with that, maybe. I just don't know. To me, that's such small potatoes right now, and I don't know why. Like, what does that do for the ACC really? Sure, it strengthens their basketball, but that does absolutely nothing to strengthen the long-term future of the conference. So I don't see a lot of help for the ACC in that, even if that were to happen. If they're trying to create like a basketball super league, that's all well and good, and you can certainly do that, but it's not going to help you with the ultimate problems here, which all revolve around football. Bud, appreciate the donation, Bud. My guy, Bud. Bud says 4 conferences ultimately leads to a natural playoff. 1 conference needs to fall. Well, that would be great, I think, for Big 12 fans if that's how it ultimately worked out. And it does naturally lend itself toward, hey, you could have the 4 teams playing in a playoff, but I think we're likely not headed toward that, because the problem here is, and I crush Jim Phillips, I feel like every show for this, but I will do it again, especially because I just read it in a long-form story about the ACC and their problems. He killed the 12-team playoff that would have had auto bids for everybody. He killed it. And now what reason do the SEC or the Big Ten have to allow auto bids to be a part of anything for a playoff? They're going to want to stockpile as many teams as they can in there. I also think it's pretty obvious we're heading to a larger than 14 playoff just because there's too much money involved in all of this. But they'll want like a 12-team playoff with no auto bids, so that theoretically, like, the SEC could have 4 of the teams in there every year. The Big Ten could have 4 of the teams in there every year. Let everybody else fight for the scraps. So unfortunately, like, anything that's like logical like that just does not seem to be the way that we're really headed. It's going to be whatever is best for the pocketbooks of everybody in the Big Ten and the SEC, and then Fox and ESPN, the TV execs that are trailing behind them. So now that doesn't mean that it couldn't still be 4 conferences exist, but I think it would be that the 2, presumably here, I think the Big 12 and the ACC would still be having to just fight for table scraps to get schools into the playoff, and like probably would most years get schools into the playoff, but or at least a school into the playoff, but you would just be like the sacrificial lamb in the first round to have to go play at Alabama or something. I think that would be closer to the actual reality there. But I appreciate the donation as always, Bud. Great supporter of the channel. Thank you for being here. Thank you for that donation. And same story from Mark here. Mark, much appreciated. Mark says, John, please designate the time zone on Twitter when you're having a chat. This is the Big 12. We span multiple time zones. Agree, Wilner is much more in reality than Canzano. That's a good point, Mark. I do need to start doing that. See, this is where me being just a guy that's been around the Big 12 my entire life, like, it's always just been about Central Time. Colorado notwithstanding, I realize Colorado, like, we had a little bit of Mountain Time mixed in there for a while. But you're right. Now with this audience, I do need to do that. Just understand that if there's ever just a time that you see out there and it's not marked, I'm going off of Central Time because I've lived in the Central Time zone my entire life. So I will try to be more accommodating with that and put that on times now when I tweet it out. But fair point, very fair point. If it happens in the future, just let me know. Tweet me, hit me up in the chat, whatever it may be, and just get on me until I come through for you on that. Michael, thank you for the donation, Michael. Michael says, as always, love the show, John. Thank you, Michael. Great comment there. Always love that, and always appreciate the support of all you guys, man. We're still cranking up the numbers here on the chat tonight. Even almost 2 weeks, coming up on 2 weeks post USC UCLA announcement here in this latest round of #realignment season. I'm probably going to give you guys about 10 more minutes here. So this is like your 5 to 10 minute warning. If you have anything that you want to get out there that has not been covered yet, make sure to do it now. You donate by clicking the $ sign below the chat box. where it says say something. That is how you can get my attention in the chat. This is your 5 to 10 minute warning on that front if you would like to do so. I'm going to continue with the David Teal article from the Richmond Times-Dispatch. And again, I've had multiple people tell me that this is one of the most plugged in reporters in the ACC. That is a blind spot for me. Probably the conference that I know the least about is the ACC. So I'm having to kind of take people's word for it here. But let me read you some of this. So it says, in the week plus since the USC-UCLA Thunderbolt, I've interacted with a dozen current or former senior ACC administrators, conversations that produced no consensus on how this plays out. But it's clear that the ACC has never been more imperiled. Quote, everyone is uneasy, one administrator said. Quote, survival, said another. Those administrators outlined 3 challenges for second-year ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips, who in the last week has huddled multiple times with conference ADs and presidents. So here are the 3 challenges that supposedly are facing Jim Phillips right now in the ACC. It says 1, manage simmering resentment among some members and lean on the ACC's long-term grant of media rights to keep his current group intact. The barrels of cash the SEC and Big Ten can offer complicate the task. Okay, that part seems obvious, right? You have to just deal with everybody's feelings right now of, man, the SEC and the Big Ten are blowing us out of the water financially. We're sitting here in the mid-30s for our TV payouts. These leagues are about to go to over $100 million. How are we going to compete here? You have to manage everybody's ego and uneasiness at this point in time. Number 2, here's number 2. Cement the ACC's access to the college football playoff by pushing aggressively for the 12-team model, complete with automatic bids to the 6 highest-rated conference champions that he and others delayed after its June 2021 unveiling. And this is why I told you guys I felt so damn justified reading this. Being like, that is exactly what I've been saying. That was such a dumb decision. And now they're saying one of his jobs is to go advocate for the thing that he just killed. Jim Phillips, man. Jim Phillips, the worst. Number 3, in concert with ESPN, determine if there's a way to markedly enhance ACC revenue through outright expansion or a TV partnership with the Pac-12. So obviously that comes into play. The Pac-12 has already thrown out their idea to him. It is trying to figure out what the details of that would be. We've heard some say it could, like people within both conferences feel like that could take weeks or months to totally figure out. So it sounds like there's a lot of work left to be done on that front. I already brought up the quote from Notre Dame AD Jack Swarbrick, who was literally leaving ACC media days where he's meeting with all these people and says, it's the Big Ten and the SEC. People are going to have to figure out how to align with one or the other. So that can't make anything feel very calm in the ACC right now if you're having athletic directors leave and saying that. And here is the article comment on that. It says, yes, an ACC AD mere moments after huddling with his colleagues on league business essentially forecasted the group's splintering. It was remarkable to hear and in no way coerced. So in no way was that like a leading question that was thrown out there by Swarbrick really without being provoked. And it says Swarbrick's candor also spoke to the residual anger over the ACC helping derail the college football playoff expansion plan that he, as in Swarbrick, SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey, and others spent years crafting. So, yeah, he spent years working on this thing, this playoff proposal, and then his new commissioner comes in and blows it up when, in turn, it would have been the best thing for the conference and now is another hurdle that they need to try and overcome right now. Says anyone who doesn't believe that multiple and perhaps most ACC schools are parsing the grant of rights for loopholes and hoping for an invitation from the SEC or Big Ten is naive. So he is telling you most, if not all, ACC schools right now are parsing the grant of rights, looking for loopholes, trying to find a way to get out. And that is, again, a well-sourced reporter within the ACC telling you that basically everybody is on the lookout for a way to get out. If a school wanted to depart 10 years before the grant expired, the price could be $300 million or more. The issue then becomes whether the grant of rights would be upheld in court and how pricey those proceedings would be. So that, I think, is important just because it does give us a number value. I had seen Dennis Dodd throw out the number of like $500 million that it could cost upward of $500 million to get out of the ACC's 14-year grant of rights. There's a number that's at least a little more manageable at $300 million, but still not very manageable at all. Because, again, we're talking about numbers that are higher than what Oklahoma and Texas would be paying, and they're not even wanting to mess with that. And they're sitting around here saying, whatever, we'll go play our game at Cincinnati. We'll play our game at UCF instead of footing that bill. So it's not easy, but the prevailing thought continues to be, we'll figure it out in court. And that was what Josh Pate reported from 24/7 Sports earlier this week, that he was hearing people in ACC country saying, like, whatever, we would just do it, figure it out in court, and find a way. It's the stakes are that high right now. So the ACC does not seem like a place of stability at all. And I think that is easy to forget. Like most of us here, we focus so much on the Big 12 situation and the Pac-12 situation and how they relate to each other. Don't forget about the ACC, because the ACC is just as much on shaky ground and shaky footing right now. So whereas I think last year it felt so isolated and lonely for the Big 12, being the league that had been poached and everybody dancing on the grave, now it's like the other two leagues are in the same position. Everything that I've been saying, and it's not like I'm some genius, everybody had been saying about two leagues pulling away has just accelerated even more this summer with what's happened with USC and UCLA. And the time is here, and everybody is feeling it, man. Everybody is feeling the stress. Okay, let me get through the last couple of donations here. Again, click the $ below the chat box if you have something for me in the last couple of minutes of the show, and then we'll get out of here. All Blue 12 says, with the arrogance and inflated ego of UT leaving the conference, sorry you got a taste of the arrogance and inflated ego of the new UT coming in, Utah. Well, we'll see. Utah's arrogance may keep them actually out of this league. All Blue 12. That's kind of the way it's feeling right now. I don't know, but you are right that it appears there will be an inflated ego coming in from Utah there. But the good news is, I think All Blue 12, this conference would not be bowing down to this UT like they have for the last UT and have since the word go back in 1994, when the conference was actually formed, before it took shape in 1996. There were issues from the beginning with Texas and always having to bow down to Texas's desires. Utah would not hold that kind of power here in this conference. So I think that would be the good news. But you're right. I have been given a dose of what Utah fans are like here. Thank you, Bud. Bud, another donation. You're the man. Bud says, great show, John. Lubbock Guest House. If you're going to Lubbock, hit up Bud Johnson, Lubbock Guest House, if you need a place to stay in the great LBK. Just make sure that I only have the one left. I do. It is AG List. Time to stop conceding that the future belongs to the SEC and Big Ten. The Big 12 can beat them. Texas proved that dollars can't buy success. Rock Chalk Jayhawk. Well, you are right. Dollars do not guarantee success. But I do think we're talking about such a difference here that it will be tough to hang on to coaches long term. You'll have less staffers. I even saw Dennis Dodd was talking about the Big Ten and the SEC going to 95 scholarships instead of 85 scholarships. And so now if they can pay for more scholarship players, you're at a disadvantage there. They can find little ways to nickel and dime you with disadvantages that, yes, could still be overcome in one-off scenarios or one season off scenarios. But I think over time, it would just be too difficult because the money gap is going to be too big, and they'll be able to control like playoff access. And so I want to be with you. Ag List, but I think that ship has already sailed, unfortunately. And there are a lot of reasons we could look back and say ESPN's unfettered promotion of the SEC really helped them get to this point. The Big Ten just geographically has been pretty fortunate to get to this point. Like, there are a lot of things that have pushed us here, but unfortunately, I do think it is the reality. But hey, don't let me rain on your parade. Don't let me rain on your parade at all. I'm here championing the Big 12 as much as I can on this channel, and will definitely continue to do so. Glenn says, it seems like those of us who want to relax and enjoy sports are being screwed by sports becoming a business. Well, Glenn, you're not wrong there. It's like right now it's July. Like, this should be a relaxing time. I don't mean to make this like all about me or those of us that work in sports media. Like, this should be a time for us to be relaxing, not thinking about it as much, recharging before the season comes around. And instead, no, everybody's just on pins and needles all the time. And in a lot of ways, it seems very emblematic of the world and our country right now, unfortunately. Like, there's just so much going on that it is very difficult to feel relaxed about much of anything and just enjoy sports. And this is not helping. For those of us where like college football is our bread and butter and college football is what we truly love, there is no time to relax, unfortunately. And like, even if you are a fan of one of the big boys and you don't have anything to worry about as far as like your existential future in the new world of college football, it still has to hurt a little bit. It still has to be a little bit different and painful and being like, man, this really is changing. And even then, you're having to worry about the stress of a new conference and what it will be like in a tougher league where every single game is going to be very difficult. Can you keep up? Like Oklahoma, it's like, can we keep going to the playoff, or can we keep winning our league? Are we going to drop down to a 9-3? That's stress that you have to deal with, right? Everybody is in that same boat right now. It is unfortunate. I feel for the college football world. I feel for all of you great college football fans out there, but I digress. All we can do, control what we can control, and that means enjoying the rest of your Sunday night. I appreciate everybody who hung around tonight for the chat. Thank you so much to everybody. If you donated, if you didn't, whatever, I just appreciate you being here. Please share the video as much as you can. If you have Facebook groups that you're in with groups of fans from the Big 12 or your school, whatever it may be, share the word about the channel. Spread it on your own social accounts, word of mouth, whatever it may be. Let's help continue to grow this thing. I appreciate you all. Follow me on Twitter at JL Kurtz. If you have anything else for me, you can reach me there. And we'll see. Should be a live show Wednesday. Big 12 Media Days coming up Wednesday and Thursday. If something big happens in between then, I'll make sure and get you some content as well. So we'll keep following this thing here on the channel. Christian, I see Christian squeezing in one last one here. Christian says, scenario, New Mexico State joins the Big 12. You've been tasked with spinning this as a positive. How do you do this? I guess you can stop and see the Breaking Bad house where Walter White threw a pizza up on the roof. That's what I've got. I think that's actually in Albuquerque, which is New Mexico, right? And not where New Mexico State is, but you'd be close to the Breaking Bad house. That's the best I can give you on spinning that as a positive. Blake, Rock Chalk, Big 12 needs to get the best from the ACC and Pac-12, Clemson, Florida State, Oregon, join us and still be legit. Well, I think, again, Oregon and Washington, that's going to be the pitch. There will be a pitch there like, hey, this can be your temporary home. Let's go take them in and see what happens. Unfortunately, I think the SEC is going to pluck off the others that you mentioned there. But I'm all for taking big swings, and Brett Yormark seemingly would be all for taking big swings as well, and we'll hear more from him on Wednesday. Maybe he'll have something to say about that. All right, I'm going to go, guys. Take care, and I will talk to you soon.